And it's another day and another build here in the studio at Microcenter. And today I have a special guest. This is Alex from our Knowledge Bar Service Department.
Hey, I'm Alex. I am from the Sharonville store. I've been working for Microcenter for about 5 years now, done hundreds of builds. Today we are doing a full hardline tube with AlphaCool parts. So we are doing a GPU block, CPU block. We've got this nice reservoir here, the Distro block, and a special tool down here, special tubing. Carbon fiber, wow.
So are we bending this or we're cutting this?
We are just cutting it. So the carbon fiber you cannot bend, so we're gonna have to use some right angle fittings and things like that, but it should give a pretty clean look at the end.
I'm into it. So you picked out some of the parts for what we're gonna be using today. What are we building with?
So we are starting out with the X870E Nova board. Really like this one. It's got great overclocking abilities, does not do lane sharing, so if you're using a lot of M.2s, it doesn't bog down your PCIe lanes. So your graphics card can be at full performance. So we've got the 9950X, so we've got a lot of good productivity in the cores there, 9100 Pro for some great speed on our storage drive, and of course 96 gigs of RAM, because you can't go wrong, can't have too much. Of course the 5092, you can't go wrong with 32 gigs of VRAM,
So this is the Asus TUF Gaming, right? Overclocked model, but we're gonna take this apart.
Yes, strip it down to the PCB, bare bones, and put that block on her.
Any advice you want to give to some builders starting their first hard tube build?
Yes, it can be a very daunting task, very scary. You think like liquid inside of a computer doesn't match, but luckily a lot of the coolant that you pick is non-conductive, so if you do get it on your parts, don't freak out. Biggest thing is just do your post-test outside of the case before. You don't want to strip all your parts down, get coolant in there, and then computer doesn't post, So
we'll start with the post-test here.
Yep, throw her in the case and get going. So grab our processor here.
So when it comes to doing a post-test like this, right? You're just doing it right outside of the case. What are we gonna do for the CPU cooler?
DDR5 is notorious for taking a long time to train the RAM when it boots up. So sometimes that can mean your processor is gonna overheat if you let it run on that post-test for too long. So we're just gonna take our air cooler that we have back here, throw that on top of the CPU while we do the post-test. That way, don't get any overheating issues. 9100 for the speed, of course.
Yeah, those Gen 5 SSDs are really great. They're really fast.
And especially if you're doing a whole bunch of video editing, even playing your games, faster the drive that you have, the faster, more optimal your games are gonna perform.
So motherboard, CPU power, that's really all you need right now.
And you got the GPU cable out too.
Oh, you know what? We're doing GPU as well?
Yes, just make sure.
You know what? Because if we're gonna take it apart.
Probably wanna make sure she boots.
Like I have an idea. I kind of wanna use our UV printer and put some designs on the case when we're done. Maybe I can 3D print some cable combs so we can make this look a little bit neater and a little bit nicer. I mean, the braided looks great, but adding the cable combs, I think is like the extra little bit there. Getting ahead of myself, but we're gonna need this guy later.
That is our power supply jumper, if you guys don't know. So we're gonna plug that into the motherboard cable. So that way when we start doing our leak test, we are just powering the pump on the cooler. And that way if we have any leaks or anything in the system, we're not shocking and frying any of our components there, because that would not be very good. And whenever I do a post-test, I like to sit the motherboard on the motherboard box. That way you can kind of lean it over the edge, and when you put your GPU, you can angle the bracket on the side, and that way everything sits properly as it should. And we will eventually take off all this plastic, but for the post-test right now, it's fine enough to leave it on there. So, that right in there. And we will just set this here.
No thermal paste?
You'll need it for that final go around, but as long as we're making contact and getting like some air to the machine, to the processor, we should be good. Doesn't actually matter too much which fan header you plug it into. For the final one, it's mainly just if you want to control RPMs on the fan, monitor the temperature, but that should be good. Down where you have your front panel connectors, you have like your power LED, your power button, your reset switch, things like that. So typically, you are going to jump the 2 pins on the top right corner. These 2 pins, top right corner, hit that, you see my fan start going. You can watch for your post-test lights up here. And as long as we hit boot or VGA, we should be good.
Now, whenever you guys do a build and service, you usually do a post-test before you do like a full assembly, right?
Yes. Some people might say, brand new components out of the box, do you need to do a post-test? I always say yes. Because, you can always have bad apples out of the bunch. You always hope and pray you don't, right? But it's always better to be safe than sorry. And, an extra 2 minutes out of your day to save maybe hours in the future, I think is always well worth it. You see we've got our threads down here, so it's actually gonna sit into the motherboard on top like this, and then it's gonna screw into the backplate on the bottom. So we're gonna end up having to take off the like OEM AM5 mounting brackets and screw it in like that. I tend to find a lot of the CPU blocks for water cooling tend to mount this way. So just be aware of that. Apex CPU block from AlphaCool. It is one of their higher end CPU blocks here. It's a lot beefier, gonna give you a lot better cooling performance. Your manufacturers are gonna give you your thermal paste and things like that. So I'm always fine using their thermal paste. I think AlphaCool is a really great company. But if your heart so desires, you're more than welcome to do like, is the Cryonaut, or they have that crazy thermal paste.
Yeah, we have Cryonaut. I mean, we have like 30 million brands of thermal paste, and there's so many. I use the one that comes with the cooler. It's always been fine, like every time.
I mean, if they're manufacturing and making it and giving it to you, it's there for a reason, so.
All right, let me ask you a question. What pattern are we putting? Are you spreading it? Or are you gonna just put a pattern? Just gonna put like a big old dot?
When you set it down, it will spread the thermal paste out a little bit, but if you look at it, typically you spread it out on the CPU before it does give you better thermal coverage, rather than just like a quick little dot that might only cover this like center part of the CPU. And another thing about these blocks too, you have to be very wary. They have specific ins and outs.
I can see it. It's hard to see on camera, but inside here, I saw it says in right there.
So technically you can run backwards. The biggest thing with liquid cooling is you just have to make sure you're not having any combating flows. So if you do run your liquid through the out, that's fine. It still runs properly. You might just get slightly worse thermals. But it comes down to like a few degrees Celsius. But I mean, if you're doing all this work in a liquid cooling build, you know, you might as well.
Yeah, do it right, right?
Do it right, yes.
And so for maintenance for this, like you just take these screws apart and pull it apart. Fortunately, we're not going to be doing that today.
And you shouldn't even have to pull it apart, really. I mean, as long as you don't get any like algae or growth in the blocks, you don't actually have to take these things apart. They're pretty self-cleaning, and you can run like anti-corrosion fluid and like anti-algae stuff through it as well. As long as you are pairing things up properly, you shouldn't have to worry about actually disassembling the block itself.
This is the most important part. I'm going to make sure that I remove the sticker.
Don't use the whole tube either. It might seem very, you might want to. You don't need it though, because you can actually put too much thermal paste on it and it will cause less optimal.
All right, so you did a good job on the spread there, and this is, the force of this is going to spread it even more. And this has got the thin screws, so it's going to pass right through. It's very top heavy.
Yes. Good quality though.
You know, weight always makes things feel like really high quality, and I have to say the weight on this block, like it's dense for sure.
And that's a huge thing that I say too, being a service tech. A lot of people ask me like recommendations on computers, and obviously like you can look at certain hardware. I say look at the build quality of things a lot though, because if you get flimsy plastic, it's more likely to break. I see a lot of problems with plastic laptops. You know, the hinges will seize up and then they just tear away from the back cover, and now you need a whole new screen.
Yeah.
And that's not too fun to deal with. And you don't need to, you know, use an impact or anything. You don't need to get these like so tight you can't get them off. Because actually with CPUs, you want to have a certain pressure point, because if it's pressing down too hard on the pins, it's just as bad as, you know, not having enough pressure. So hand tight should be good there. Because it's not like when you screw it down on this plate, you're not worrying about like if the water's gonna leak out, right? Because it's all isolated within the block. You're just worried about the pressure point of how it's touching that CPU.
This looks really nice. Like this block.
It matches perfectly with
like the angular, like all the cross sections and stuff.
I guess we can just start peeling off the plastics, throwing it in.
What was my favorite part?
It's all fun and games until you have to peel it off a million graphics cards in a day, and you just peel after peel after peel. But if you're just doing it once, it's very satisfying.
I like to peel it at this stage and then just wipe it down when I'm done.
Yeah.
Because once you get stuff in here, like it's not coming off.
We see a lot of people leave like the plastic on their graphics cards too, and like the cards get hot, you know, they can melt the plastic and you don't really want that. So my rule of thumb is typically motherboard in, then I'll do all of the case cables, everything like that, and then I will do the power supply after that. I typically like to do the power supply, get that all routed before you start throwing in your radiators, things like that. Sometimes you can have clearance issues. I mean, if you got big hands like Jordan over here, it's not very fun to work with, so.
I'll hand her over to you, and then I'll get you some screws. So what are some of your favorite builds that you've done?
I like the weird builds. I really like builds in like the Thermaltake P3, P5s, the ones that are wall mounted. I'm doing my own personal one right now.
It looks like a fish tank.
It's a fish tank. It's not mineral water. People always tell me to put the mineral oil in there. You know how expensive mineral oil is though, to fill up a whole computer case?
Yeah, per gallon?
Yeah.
It's pretty pricey.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.
Well, you're doing that. So this is one of our rads here. This looks pretty nice. Pretty straightforward.
Cool thing about AlphaCool, they make a few different types of radiators, but they put a lot of different ports for you. So you can determine, like, even on the bottom of that radiator, you've got a drain port down there. So if your like lowest point is easier to drain out of your rad, maybe than your reservoir, put your drain plug on that.
Right, because you were talking to me before, the reservoir is going to end up over here.
So, and that's a big thing with liquid cooling, right? The maintenance on it is another thing. They typically recommend you change the fluid at least once a year. And you are going to be thanking yourself if you put in a little bit extra time now and make it easy to drain out.
You've seen some pretty like algae sort of bit, like hard tubes, right?
Yes.
What was the one you were telling me about?
It was in a some Lee and Lee case, and it had like the distro block on the front of it, and it was just, it should be clear, right? Everything should be clear, but it was black, just completely black. And it's not even something that you can flush out with coolant. Like, I had to completely disassemble that block, take out all the O-rings, like wash everything off. Don't use tap water, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely like antimicrobial. Always recommend try to keep it out of the sunlight as well. Obviously, like if it has to be in a room with sun, that's fine. But I know a lot of gamers like their darkness anyway, so.
All right, she's in there. Cool, so we'll get some cables lined in there and then we'll just kind of keep going. Yeah, so that's one of the RGB bits, and then the other one I think slides
down. We're gonna run all of the cables from the case to the board. That way we can just get all that managed very nice and tight, and then get the power supply thrown in there. Easier to get all your cables managed beforehand. That way you have as much room as you need to move your hands around. Some of these cases, they make it look really nice for cable management when you get it all cleaned up, but can be a tight squeeze once you have everything in there. So, was there like another, because this is for the RGB on the block. Did it have like an adapter in that box?
Yes. Yes, it did.
Cool thing about a lot of the water blocks too is you don't actually have to worry about like plugging in the fan cables, but some of them will have like your RGB headers on them. So that's really the only cables that you have to route for that. So go ahead, and a lot of times you'll have your like proprietary, proprietary cables right here. So a lot of times you'll get like an extra adapter that you just kind of plug in. So don't freak out if you see a cable and you're like, what is that? There's likely just an adapter for it. These all just come out with like screws here, just like that. So one thing I will point out, AlphaCool with their blocks, same thing on the GPU one. I'll kind of show it under this camera if I can. We're using that same like proprietary like RGB connector, but luckily you can run each other off of it. So I'm gonna route from my CPU block into the GPU block, and that way we can just run off of one RGB header rather than two. So that's really nice. Turn this around. I typically like to face my fan for the power supply outside of the case, because if you shove it the other way, your fan is just exhausting or intaking into literally nothing, which will just cause your power supply to run a little bit hotter, and the aim of the game is to make it as cool as possible, so.
Power supplies can overheat if they're choked up like that.
Yes.
They can and will, absolutely.
The Seasonic does have like a hybrid mode as well, which is really nice. And like, I'm not one to necessarily complain about the loudness of my fans, but you can always try to turn on that hybrid mode if you are super curious. I know a lot of times with like the liquid cooling systems, people will change like their fan ramps to not run at 100% as well. It's just something that you can be very picky about once it's built. Kind of get it to exactly what your heart desires in terms of decibel level and coolness level. So a lot of times when I'm cable managing my builds, like you definitely want to try to keep it as clean as you can from the get-go. Don't try to leave it all till the end. But a lot of times I'll use like temporary zip ties, tie up as much as you can, and then you can kind of like snip away the ones that you don't need.
Let me ask you a question. Okay, so I'm getting the vertical mount ready for your GPU. Now you said you wanted to put this at 30 degrees. Is that gonna make your tube run harder?
It might, but we've got
Oh, like right angle bits, and we can finagle it.
all the fittings, yeah. And you know, worst case, if it doesn't end up working with the 30, we'll just move it back, but I think the 30 will end up looking really cool if we can. What I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of like zip tying like my motherboard cable, and I zip tied some of my like CPU cables back here. That way they're just kind of grouped together. And if I want, we can go ahead and clean those up later. But it at least tries to keep it as simple and clean in the back as we can for now. Luckily, a lot of the parts that we're using are paired up well together, so we don't have to worry about a lot of like hubs or like extra adapters or anything like that.
Yeah, I know that actually helps out a lot.
And I'll just kind of leave my SATA cable like free roaming for now, since I'll still have to plug it into our pump. So we'll have to figure out how to route that afterwards. You can see even with the fan text too, nobody likes to do classic 4 3-pin RGB headers anymore, so we got another adapter that we'll have to use. That is a-okay. You know what I just thought of? We should probably mount our bottom fans before we put this in.
All right, so these are the Apex Stealth metal fans from AlphaCool. And these are going to be gorgeous looking.
So with these fans anyway, so if you're not screwing these fans into a radiator or anything, if you're just going like on our bottom plate like we have here, they give you the stealth mounting nuts, so that way when you thread your screws through, you actually have something to catch them on. So you're not just like floating willy-nilly in there.
I really like this. I think I just want fans that look like this from now on.
Big thing too, airflow in the case, right? You don't want negative pressure, you don't want bad pressure, and heat rises. So we're gonna be doing intake on the bottom, exhaust on the top, and then probably bringing in from that front as well. So we're gonna be flowing in, up and out. One thing about this case and the vertical mount GPU bracket that we're using, you gotta be careful with clearance on it as well. So some fans are thicker than others. I think these were around 25 millimeters, if I remember correctly. So it's just at that cutoff point. But I'm still going to mount them underneath our bracket here. That way we don't have to worry about clearance issues at all. I might grab that from you once you get a second, just make sure. Because I might actually mount, it'll probably look better if I mount them up. I just want to make sure there's enough clearance.
You want to
if I
check
put
with
that,
this?
yeah.
Got it. What do you think? Want to give it a shot?
I'll give it a shot. Worst case, like these fans aren't that bad to move around, so.
Let's try it out.
Yeah. I'd like to see as much chrome as I possibly can.
Yes.
So.
All right, I got this long boy here. Do you want to run them through first, since it's going to get snug in there?
So that should be hopefully enough slack to, if not, it's not that big of a deal to run 2 RGB.
Okay.
There might be enough clearance to just move it down, I think, if we end up not being able to.
She's coming along nicely, huh? And just for the sake of fun, I do kind of want to test fit this at the 30-degree angle whenever you get a minute.
Actually, it should even fit with the, if I run like both tubes, because those,
Because that 30 degrees is not going to work.
yeah, well.
Let's try to put it upright, and then we'll see what that looks like.
We are working on our push-pull radiator right now, which is gonna mount up top. So we're gonna have fans on the top and bottom, and that way you're just getting more airflow through the case. So we've got intake on the bottom, and then we're gonna exhaust out the top because heat rises. So what I'm doing right now as well is the AlphaCool radiators, they're super cool because they leave you a lot of different ports. So depending on how you wanna route your tubes, you can close off those little ports, and they give you these little screws right here. So you go ahead and putting those in right now.
You're talking about running from one rad to another. Like, what are you thinking in terms of routing your tubes, right?
A lot of people will say that flow matters. If you run CPU to GPU, you're running like hotter water or hotter coolant towards one of your components. But realistically with the water cooling, like the equilibrium, it cancels out so fast that it's not that big of a deal. So we're just gonna go ahead, we're gonna route our one tube from this radiator to the other one, and this is gonna go ahead and push to our CPU and GPU back to our block that's gonna be mounted on the back of the case. So we're just getting as much coolant through this and then routing them to our parts and then back through. Definitely wanna make sure you get these snug and tight, otherwise you're just gonna have leaks elsewhere in your case, which is not very fun. So this is gonna be mounted up top with our fans right here, and I'm gonna have a tube running down from the out into this reservoir that's fed on the back right here, and then this is gonna run back to the rest of our components and the distro block. The big thing with the water cooling as well is just, like I mentioned before, you've got the ins and outs on each of your blocks, so you just have to make sure that you're not feeding opposite water flows into each other, otherwise you're just gonna have a stagnant flow and it's not going to cool your system at all. So that's the biggest thing. Otherwise, like people argue serial versus parallel, and while you might get some minute temperature differences, realistically with this like big radiator, it's gonna be perfectly fine to cool these parts. And again on these, you really just need them to be like hand tight. You don't need to crank it down like you're using an impact or anything like that. So I just like to get it hand snug there and then just go back with the little tool that they provide and just give it one last turn, make sure that we get it real snug. But you don't need to strip anything out by any means. So that should be good for these. And big thing with the push-pull, again, you don't want to have the airflow feeding into each other. You want to make sure that it's all just pushing directly through the radiator. Most of the time you don't necessarily need the push-pull setup, but especially with this NV7 case, you got the big forehead. In this case, you might as well take up that room somehow, and I think this will end up looking really good. Because technically they do recommend a certain amount of fans per like the heat that the components give off. So I think the TDP or something of
The 9950X?
yeah, I think it's closer to like 200, and I think
165 base, but then it can go to closer to 200, yeah.
and then I think the 5090 can go up to like 600, I believe. So in theory, technically we do not have enough coverage. However, with the push-pull, it should be ample enough space. And you're also not running the components at full load most of the time, so it's very minute. To be really nice with cable management, I like to route the fan cables actually behind where the screws mount in. That way it kind of like gives you that nice cable management and you just don't have like wires flowing everywhere.
That's kind of what you're running through here, right?
Yeah, so if you kind of like look at this fan, you see that we've got the cables kind of routed behind where the screws go in, and that way it just kind of gives it that cleaner look that you want to have with this. Cut the cameras again.
She's a natural.
Yo, hey, I didn't have my Minecraft YouTube channel at 13 for nothing. I had 200 subscribers, y'all. I got like 15,000 views on that thing. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and mount our distro plate on the back of the case right here. So we went ahead and took off this little bracket that they have. So we're just gonna take this, I'm gonna give that to you.
Got it.
And I'm a fan of washers. I love washers. So go ahead and put that on our screws here and feed it in. I just like the flat distro plates that AlphaCool is making now too. It just gives you a slightly different look. Just gives you a nice little different look here as opposed to like your cylinder shaped reservoirs. And they make different sizes as well. This is just our 240. They even make a 280 and a 360. So sometimes people will mount it on the right where we have our other radiator, but I figured more radiator space is better because technically you always want a reservoir. But I mean, as long as you have your pump, you don't need the biggest reservoir in the world. It can mainly just be for looks at that point. So we've got this port right here, if you can see it, is basically just a drain. So I don't even need to actually run anything to that, as long as I run into here. So a lot of the reservoir, what it does a lot is it'll help the air escape, like get the bubbles out of the system. So as long as you have something running to that drain portion, you should be okay. What you might see in like a serial loop, one could say, because technically you would run CPU out to GPU in. So again, just going to the same flow, as long as everything is going in the same direction, we should be good. Got our 4 mounting points there, that should be plenty. It's gonna be a heavy computer. So we pretty much have everything mounted in here now. We've got our distro plate, we've got all of our fans, push-pull rad, everything like that is routed and good to go. So now is the fun part of taking apart the GPU and putting the block on that. And after that, we should be good to start cutting our tubes. We're gonna go ahead and start taking apart our GPU and put on this water block. So it seems like a very daunting task. The first time that I took a GPU apart, I was freaking out, but it's really not that bad. You literally just take out a whole bunch of screws and the plastic pulls off. You do have to be mindful, there are cables that plug into the PCB where the fans go. So you basically just go take out as many screws as you can and see if it pops off.
Now what about for this block here? Are we gonna disassemble this as well?
No, so that is like the actual...
Oh, that's the block itself. It's these back here.
Mm-hmm. So you just take out all of those screws on the back plate. It just sits on. And the cool thing, AlphaCool, just to match everything else, they do give us a black IO shield thing as well. So we're gonna go ahead and take off the standard one that it comes with.
It's gonna look pretty good. Just for reference, this is a 4090 that is disassembled, so you can see. That's where the pads are gonna go. You're gonna thermal paste this guy. Just go stick right on there.
Just unplug those there. Did have to take off the heat sink screws right there. Go ahead and take off the shield as well.
Yeah, and just slowly. Oh, yeah, look, I popped
Just
right
needed
off.
a little little oomph.
Woo. All right, you ready? I'll let you do the honors.
Yes. Just like that, wow.
Ooh, look at that.
Giant heat sink.
That is a big heat sink.
Huge heat sink.
Right, here's our 5090. Here's our 4090. So then you can get that final screw.
Get that out of here. It's really easy. It's crazy that this small of a component is worth $2,000-$3,000.
Thermal paste is cleaned off.
Should be good on that. So now we're just gonna go ahead and apply some of our thermal pads onto the water block itself. And then we're gonna go ahead and do thermal paste, smash it on there, flip it around, some more thermal pads, and then screw everything together. And then again with these screws, they don't have to be like super tight to the point that you're stripping it up, but as long as you are making adequate contact, it will spread your thermal paste and pads accordingly. And just like that, we have water blocked 5090 overclocked edition. You can actually see and look in and make sure your thermal pads are actually making contact. Yeah. And it looks like everything is smashed down accordingly, so we should be good. Don't get too excited and forget to put on your plugs in the back. A lot of the manufacturers will make the blocks so you can route your tubing either on the front or the back of the card, but based on how we have the case designed, we are just gonna cover both of the back holes and run the in and out on the front. Time to go ahead and throw our GPU block in here, so nice. Just like that, GPU block is in.
When it comes to planning the route for your tubes, how does that work? Like, what do you measure?
People have like a lot of different ways they do it. I've seen some people, so like we're not bending any of these tubes since we're using the carbon fiber, but I've seen some people use those little like fuzzy noodle looking things to kind of map out how you might want to bend it. But mainly what I'm gonna do, since we're only using like right angle fittings, is I'll just get my trusty ruler. We'll kind of measure out like a rough distance. And then we'll go ahead and take the carbon tubes and just start cutting them. Main thing again is just making sure we actually line everything up properly with like the right angle fittings and things like that. So I've drawn up a few pictures myself already of how I'm planning on routing it, but sometimes things might not work out how you initially planned. So sometimes you gotta make some last minute changes. Welcome to the Microcenter test lab. We switch locations here to start cutting our tubes. That way we can be in a little bit bigger of a space where our protective gear, everything like that. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about my design process before we actually start cutting the tubes and how I figure out what I want to do. So I usually start out, like I'll take a picture of the design like after we have everything in the case. That way I can kind of see like dimensions, because sometimes things don't fit exactly how you want it to. So once I snap the picture, I'll usually open up like my drawing tool or something on my iPad. But I basically just take the lines of the tubes and just keep drawing until I get the aesthetic and the design that I want. The biggest thing with the tubing is you have to maximize efficiency with aesthetics, especially when it comes to only having a certain amount of tubing. You don't want to start making unnecessary cuts or bends and not fully thinking it through beforehand. With this is just the flow of the water, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter if you run CPU to GPU or GPU to RAD or anything like that. You just want to make sure you don't have conflicting like water paths, and that's the biggest thing. The design that I've started is we've gone from the pump and I'm going to the inlet of the GPU. GPU is going to feed out to our radiator on the side, and that radiator from the side is going to feed into our CPU. And then our CPU is feeding back into our distro plate, which then feeds back out to our top radiator right here, and then that drops back down into the tank, and that gets recycled and pumps back out to the GPU. And that way we have cooling from the radiator to the GPU and the radiator to the CPU, and you're not technically getting like hotter coolant from one part to the other. Doesn't technically matter once everything equals out in temperature, but if you can design it like that, might as well try. So with that said, we'll go ahead, get our protective gear on and get started. Carbon fiber can release a lot of particles, so you don't want to breathe that in by any means. So we've got our gloves on, our mask, and then our safety goggles. Just make sure any debris you're not breathing in or getting it in your eye. I basically just lined up my tube where I want to place it in there, wrapped it around with some Scotch tape, and then pointed some arrows where I want to make my cut. I typically put a little bit longer of a length than I need, that way you can cut down if you need to. Always easier to take more off than try to add anything. So let's go ahead and do it. I didn't get the exact cleanest cut on that, which is why we're gonna go in with a deburr tool and some sandpaper. Just get that down really nice and even. You don't wanna have anything that might poke your O-rings and then cause leaks in the future. Go ahead and make sure this fits our gap and go from there. And that is looking like a pretty good length. So when we end up throwing that in here with our fitting, did end up getting that a little bit long, which is okay. So I can go back and cut that down if I need to, which I will. You also have to take into account like how far your tube is gonna actually sit into that fitting. All right, so I marked it off again, put my tape on this right here. We're gonna go ahead, put this to the absolute lowest that it can go. So if you're using a tool like this and you don't like that, you can switch to the hacksaw. A lot of people do recommend hacksaws with like 32 TPI, so like 32 teeth per inch on the blade, but I like power tools. So got a lot cleaner of a cut on that go around, which is nice. So pull this off and she should work. And if you guys are wondering, we're just covering up the build every time because this can give off a little bit of particles. So just want to make sure we keep it as clean as possible. Also, if you have long hair, tie it back. That's probably also a good idea. And we are still just like slightly too long. So might end up taking that hacksaw to this bit a little bit later there. Make sure we get a good fit on that. Inside of this tube, I didn't have it sitting all the way flush. You do have to put some pressure to get it past that O-ring on the inside. So this might actually end up working okay. I just don't want to shove these ends into the tubes yet until I can sand them down because I don't want to damage any of those O-rings. These are nearly identical in length, so we can probably just end up using this for our other side too. We are feeding the out of the radiator back into that distro tank that ends up flowing back into something else. But we are flowing to this inlet right here as well because this is going to be going from our CPU out with all of our hot coolant back in and looping around. So a lot of times, like if you use a distro plate like this, you are technically making some extra steps. Or it could be considered as like a slightly different bend. It's just how you want to look at the project there. Same thing on this tube, slightly long. So I'm going to show you guys really quick how I'm going to use the sandpaper here. I have such a small distance that I need to chop off of this and I don't want to hook it up to my tool or use like my saw or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is just take it to my 320 grit sandpaper and just rub it down until it gets a little bit shorter, and then I can take it to my 220 grit and my 120 grit. That way I can get like a really nice finish and get to the exact length that I need without having to hook it to any other machine or equipment. So work it in a circle there. And there is one edge that is slightly longer than the others, so I can try to hit that and eventually work it down to get pretty flush. You can see all of the dust and particles that come off of that, so put my gloves on. More even on this finish right here. There's still a little bit more you need to go down, but you don't even need to apply that much pressure or anything, just the continuous movement, and just keep double checking because again, would be really easy to just sand it down too far and you don't want that. I will keep going at this a little bit, keep double checking my measurements, and then move on to the next tube. Again, I'm not going to put any of these fully into the fittings yet until I have a chance to wash them off because I don't want any remnants of this dust getting into our system at all. And again, once I push these into both of the fittings, our length will shorten just a little bit. I will go ahead and keep this at this length for now. And then once we get everything fully into the case, we can make our final adjustments. The fittings do add more length than what you might think, especially like these right angles down. Again, always make your tubes a little bit longer and it's so much easier to shave down. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that I have my longest routes run, and that way when we get down to just like those really small ones that we need to run, we should have just like spare shorter tubes that we should be able to cut to length. Forgetting what tube goes where, you can always just take a little piece of tape or something. I'm gonna write like CPU in or something. It'll block the card a little bit, but if we come down, you can still see how the water flows into there, which I think will be nice. How this distro plate is, typically they have it designed to have your drain port on the side right here, but our case panel is gonna hit that. So they actually have this like dual inlet design for your GPU. So depending on where this like block sits in your case, you can decide if you wanna have your GPU running to this top one or the bottom one. But since these are all coming kind of from the same area, what I'm gonna do is run from this top port right here and then make this bottom one my drain plug. So for that, maintenance is so crucial in liquid cooling. And if you wanna do it right and put yourself a drain plug, it'll save you so much time. How I typically do it is I'll get my drain plug like this with a ball valve, and I'll have a cap on the end. That way if the ball valve eventually starts giving out or anything, you still have that extra level of protection. So this is gonna sit in at the bottom right here, and then I'll typically grab like a soft tube, put like one of the barbed fittings on there, and that way you can screw into your drain plug right here and just route that soft tube outside of the case, and that way you don't have to worry about it dripping onto any of your components inside. Typically speaking, with your drains, you want to have it at the lowest point of your build, because obviously the liquid is going to flow down with gravity. So technically, our lowest point on the build would be our radiator on the side, but we are using both of those inlets, which is fine. So what we're going to do is just run it from here instead, and that should still be ample enough drainage. All right, after a few hours, we finally have all of our cuts done on our tubes here. We got them sanded down. Everything is nice flush and no barbs or anything poking out, so we should be good for our O-rings. So we have now migrated back into the other studio space. We cleaned out our tubes here, so I ran them through water, and then I pushed some paper towels through them to get any extra debris, and then rinsed them once more. So we should be pretty set without having any extra debris floating around, hopefully. Go ahead and put the tubes in. I'll take all my labels off because we have a lot of tubes that are very similar lengths, but they're not quite, so I don't want to start getting things mismatched. So go ahead and pull this off. One of your caps here slides on first, like that, and then you're going to take your O-ring fitting thing right here and down. It can be a little tricky sometimes. Go ahead and push it down farther than you'll need to. That way you don't have any like blockage when you try to actually put it in to the other fitting. So should be good like that. When you put that in, you should feel kind of like a pop when it goes past that O-ring inside of the tube. So you see I don't have as much room. It does still turn right now because I don't have everything locked down, but that's all right. Slide our O-ring down here. Got some clearance things, so luckily our RAM is not any taller. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be able to get this past. And I'll typically get it threaded in a little bit there, but then I'll go ahead and tighten it down once we get the other tube fitted in. So we have like these L connectors, which we're using for our like right angle bends. These are a little bit different than like your 90 degrees because they don't have the thread on either side. They're both female to female. So make sure you just go ahead, screw fitting in on either direction there. Going to take another cap. Again, just sliding it on there. And again, just slide it on there. Should kind of feel that pop when it gets seated in there properly. Go ahead, slide down our O-ring. Should be good. Tighten that up a little bit. So just be aware when you are using fittings like these, especially with your L connectors right here, you're basically doubling up the fittings that you're gonna need. So whereas if you did like acrylic tubes and you're bending it, you're eliminating the price point of essentially 3 extra fittings per bend. So just keep that in mind when you're doing something if you're just running straight tubes with the fittings or if you're gonna do the bends with acrylic. So you're honestly gonna have to use a good amount of force when you're shoving the tubes in there, so be aware of that. A lot of times I'll do like a little bit of a turning motion, that way you can kind of like get it around that O-ring. But as soon as you feel like that extra little pop in, you should be seated pretty well. If you were using like a full acrylic tubing and if you're running to maybe like an acrylic like distro block like this, a lot of times you can actually like look inside of the fitting to see if it's hitting the end of it. That's what I did on my personal build, but for something like this, you really have to go based on feel. The tubing is pretty strong, so you don't necessarily have to worry about breaking it unless you're maybe shoving it directly into like a glass panel or something, but that is not the case. So we have some good structural integrity here. And again, like hand tight when you screw those fittings in. A lot of times, I know companies like Bits Power will use like green O-rings. AlphaCool also gave us a few different colored O-rings as well, so it's a good hitting point as well. If maybe you're screwing directly into an acrylic block, again, you can see if you have any green or red or whatever color is showing, can be a pretty good indicator of if you have that snug enough or not. So again, just be aware. Maybe you like run the wrong tube or something, or you get it in there and you're like, oh shoot, it's a little bit longer than I want. It's fine to pull the tubes back out. I mean, as long as you have everything sanded down properly, you shouldn't be damaging your O-rings. But obviously the less movement you can do, the better. So order matters, mainly because of how these fittings are designed, because you want the fitting that you shove the tube into, and then you want that O-ring to create the seal, and then you use the cap to actually tighten it down and keep that seal sealed. So, and that way, like, no extra movement or anything like that. Because again, like once you have everything sat down, these shouldn't really move that much. They might have like a little bit of give, like this one right now has a little give right there because I haven't tightened it all the way down, but that should be okay. Another thing you should also be mindful of, especially acrylic tubing or even this carbon fiber right here, your fittings can scuff it up pretty easily. So just be aware when you are running especially if you have like the tight fit right here, like where we have the RAM, like when I had to move it a little bit, it can scuff it up, and it doesn't necessarily damage like the functionality of the tube. But if you are putting in all this effort and all this work, you definitely want to make sure everything looks as clean as possible. Again, I don't like tighten down all of my fittings until the very end. That way I just do my like last once over. So we're going back to our final few runs here. I did run into a few problems where I did end up needing to sand some of my tubes down a little bit more. I also forgot that we do have a little bit of leeway here. I didn't screw in my radiator all the way. That way I could kind of adjust where my radiator sits based on how long I cut my tubes. So I'm getting the rest of these fitted on and we're almost ready. We finally have all of our tubes ran. We're looking good. I tried to use one of our compression test tools, but unfortunately the battery died and
That's my fault. Yeah, it's a little bit old, but we're gonna try this the old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way, you know, lay down the paper towels and you pray. Pulled out my motherboard cable and we put this jumper on. That way when I turn the computer on, we are just running the pump. So that way if any fluid does leak out, we're not risking like frying anything. But also, again, this fluid is non-conductive. So in theory, if you do get it on a part, it shouldn't hurt it, but better safe than sorry.
So I'll stand ready with the power switches and you let me know when you want me to turn it on.
And you can see awesome. So our flow is already working out well right here. You can see some of that draining into our GPU block, which is good. So we shall let that keep filling up. And I typically use shop towels. We just have paper towels for now. We were gonna use microfibers, but it's easier to see if something leaks onto a paper towel. I would kick her on for a little bit here.
Yep. Let me know when you want me to turn it off.
Should be good to turn it off, yeah. No leaks, no leaks. Oops.
Oh, found our first leak. There it is.
Bum, bum, bum.
Right over here. So it's just this fitting. I think it just needs to be tightened down.
Sometimes if you need to get a little bit tighter of a grip on your fittings and you want to use some like pliers or something, I'll typically wrap it with like a microfiber or another paper towel. That way you don't have to worry about scuffing it up at all. It's just a lot of turning it on and off to make sure everything looks good.
All I'm doing is flicking the switch in the power supply, and that's enough to, when you have the jumper in, run the pump.
Fill up the reservoir until we can't hit that point anymore, and then at that point we'll screw the cap back on to make it the airtight seal. And then that way it can run for a while and like get all the bubbles out of the loop. And then you can open it back up and fill it up again. One thing you'll notice too is if you do have a good like airtight seal in your liquid, when you take off that cap, you'll notice the liquid shift as well. That's just because you're letting air back into the system, which is a good thing when you're testing and taking off the thing. And you'll start to notice as the rest of the liquid starts to pass through my loops, it's feeding back in from my radiator here, and then my level is starting to stay a lot more equal rather than like sucking it all down back into the pump there. What I did is I put our like fill port back on and closed the entire loop, so therefore it should be an airtight system. That way when all of my like other bubbles escape up to the top, we are just keeping that intact. And it comes to this air bubble in the top, and then once we take that fitting back off, we can just fill it up to the rest of the way. So I'll typically let my stress test with my leak test run for a few hours, or at least make sure nothing fails. And then once we have like an operating system on the computer, I'll boot it into one of our stress tests, which is like OCCT, or something like Furmark, something that's gonna utilize like 100% of the card or the CPU. That way you can crank up the heat and kind of work out those bubbles faster because it just heats up the coolant better. But it really is just a waiting game. Once you make sure you have no leaks, it's just letting all of those bubbles disperse out of the system. And once you have it like that, you're pretty good. Typically speaking, even in like this system right here, we haven't even used like a full bottle of coolant. I typically recommend picking up 2 bottles just in case, especially if you have a leak in the system. It's always better to have more than less. But most systems, unless you're doing a lot of radiators or like a lot of distro plates, or maybe you're even cooling like your M.2 or something, who knows. But most of the time, like your loops aren't gonna use more than 1 bottle of fluid. A lot of times, if you're getting a little impatient with having your bubbles escape, you can show right here, like on our graphics card, we should have this entire line right here, should all be liquid, but we've kind of got like an air pocket in there. So the best way to do that is just move the system, just pick it up and move it around. Because once you actually have that airtight seal, like your tubes aren't gonna be moving around. They should be pretty snug. So moving your computer like this should not cause anything to come loose unless you did it wrong.
Did a nice little wiggle test, got some of the air out of the GPU block. Well, the GPU block is meant to be horizontal, and since we have it vertical, once we put the whole thing horizontal on its back, all that air came rushing right out.
And a lot of times when I'm doing that final touch-up, I'll also bend the computer back. That way I can get the liquid farther away from my like fill port, and that way you can get as much as you can in. And then when you end up putting your drain port back on, you'll actually see that the liquid kind of hits where the fill port is. The more liquid you can have in the system, the better. So while it is technically possible to run a liquid cooling system without like a reservoir or this like distro block, it's typically not recommended because this is the tool that usually helps you get the most air out of the system. And it acts as like your fill, where you can fill it as well. Otherwise, if you have like just a pump, now you're gonna be finagling with, are you gonna fill it from the radiator, or like, are you going to put like another adapter on it from one of your other ports? So this just kind of makes it a little bit more streamlined. Same thing down here with our drain plug right here. So it's at the lowest point of our distro block. That way, whenever we have to do like our maintenance or our flushes, which are about like 1 time a year or so, if not 2, you can just simply open up this ball valve, connect a soft line tube to this, and then just drain it right out of the system. That way you don't have to worry about anything leaking into the case itself.
So while Alex was building this all day, I was fiddling with a UV printer. And I took the glass. Remember I stole a glass from you earlier?
Yeah, and you didn't put it back on, right?
I didn't put it back on, yeah, but here you go. So we UV printed the microcenter logo on the front panel over here. I think it looks pretty good.
I think it looks, yeah, I think it looks pretty slick. I like the UV. Just add like another touch of customization to your cases, which I really like, because I am all about customization. Alrighty, so we've got the full system all set and done now. We've got the colors, the tubes, the liquid, all good. So I wanted to go ahead and boot it up into some stress tests just to see like what temperatures we're running at. So I've actually got Furmark running at the same time as the CPU and RAM test on OCCT. And we're honestly looking kind of better than I thought I was gonna be. We're sitting at about 32 degrees maxed out on that GPU and about like 60 or so max for the processor, which is a lot better than I'd want, because I've even been letting this run for a while too. I've been switching it on and off. So I think everything is looking a-okay.
How do you feel about your first build here in the studio?
I think it is, I am pretty happy with it, and I will definitely be back to do more.
Yeah, I think so. Well, you really knocked this one out of the park. I'm really impressed.
Yeah.
And we haven't really done a lot of like hardline tube content here, but I think we're gonna dive really into it this year and go big and do a couple of big crazy builds.
Go big or go home, so.
I got a couple of fun ideas. Yeah. And I'm really happy with the way that this one came out. So stay tuned, we'll be doing more here. You can get all of this at your local microcenter. We are gonna have all of the AlphaCool products featured in this video relatively soon at microcenter. So stay tuned, check the link in the description below. And as always, if you don't have a microcenter near you, then be sure to comment hashtag I want a microcenter near me. Future Kevin, this is just a lot of busy work. Also, our B or C camera is just pointed at the wall for some reason.
Where do I look?
Just look at all of them. Just look at all 3. That's what I do. Just 1, 2, 3.
If you don't have one leak, you didn't do it right. I'm just kidding.